This is Clayton Howe's Entertainment X. For this episode, I chat with Michael Rader, executive producer of Theatre Aspen, and we cover a little bit of everything from early inspirations growing up to contracts, negotiating, and so much more. So I hope you enjoy part one with Michael Rader. We're back. I'm Clayton Howe, and today with me on Zoom is Michael Rader. Michael, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure, Clayton.
So much to talk about. I want to talk about your journey to Cirque, talk about Theatre Aspen, general management, and so much more. Before we get to any of that, I want to take it back to the beginning of time for you. What were your entertainment dreams growing up?
Oh my God. Well, I grew up in a I didn't know it at the time, but it was a super arts bustling community of Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
Dayton, when I grew up, Dayton was the home of like 4 or 5 pretty big national corporations. And what that meant is each of those companies had a pretty sizable chunk of funds that they had to invest or would invest in the community every year. And they were very good about investing in the arts. So, Dayton is by no means a large town. It is probably, about the size of the Upper West Side, who knows, population wise. But, growing up, we had 2 professional dance companies. We had an opera, we had a symphony, we had an equity company, we had 2 touring houses, professional tap company. Just the was. And I thought this is what it is everywhere. There's just theater everywhere. There's arts everywhere. And my parents were also very good about getting us involved in the arts. This was like the mid 80s. And so Broadway was sort of in its Andrew Lloyd Webber, Les Mis, Chess, Miss Saigon heyday of these mega musicals. And, my parents my mom especially just loved it. And so, we would, I was telling a friend about this the other day, but I remember I have this memory of my father and I, like this bonding moment of one Christmas, they surprised us by giving us tickets to the tour Phantom was coming to town or coming to Cincinnati. Dayton was too small for those things. And my parents got us front row seats because, that's what you do. Those are the best seats in the house, so I remember sitting in the front row with my dad. And at one point he leaned over and he said, look at her face, look at the intensity of her face. And, I was probably 10 years old. And it was just such a memory of my father, who is this big sports guy and basically a tennis pro. And, it was a way that we connected as well. So, my mother and I would do shows together, like summer stock shows in our hometown. And then my dad and I also bonded over it. And it's been a bond that we still have to this day. So I was very fortunate growing up in that community. And there was a director who grew up in Dayton, who in the 80s moved back home because he was dying from AIDS. And he started a summer theater there, and I don't know how he did it. It was a community theater, but he somehow convinced the symphony to play as the orchestra for these productions, and it was outdoors. So it was called Theater Under the Stars. And he somehow got the symphony to play. So everyone would bring their lawn chairs and set up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you'd reserve your seat and then come back for the show at night. But, I grew up seeing Fiddler on the Roof and The King and I and Carousel, outside under the stars with the Philharmonic playing. And again, I thought everybody has this, this is just what every town in the country has. So, I was hooked. I was hooked at a very early age. And then I thought, well, I can do this. So I started doing my own productions in my parents' driveway. When I was 10 years old, I would hire the local kids from the neighborhood. I would make them sign contracts so that they wouldn't go to baseball practice instead of their King and I rehearsals.
I love it.
And we would put on like the cast recording, and we would perform the King and I for the block. And I've been hooked ever since.
Was there a defining moment for you to decide to do this as a career, or was it always there?
Kind of always there. I remember being in high school and like all the other kids going to like career counseling sessions with, the counselors, and what do you want to do? And I remember sitting down with my counselor in high school, and I think she was completely relieved, because all the other kids, not all the other kids, but I think a lot of the kids were coming in going, I have no idea what I want to do. I don't, and I just said, I want to be an actor. I want to be a producer. I want to be a director. I want to go to, school. Here's the schools I want to go to. And she was like, oh, okay, great. My work is done. So no, it was always just something I never had any doubt about. When I was applying for schools or thinking about next steps after high school, I never really entertained any other options. It was always the arts.
I love that you had people sign contracts in your driveway. Where did you learn that at such a young age?
I had this director. His name was Keith Prentice, he was in The Boys in the Band on Broadway. He was the original Rolf in Sound of Music on the tour. When he came back to Dayton to start this company, he made us sign contracts, and so I guess I learned it from that. I mean, that would be the only real experience I had. And so I pulled out our little typewriter word processor thing and typed them up, and had my dad take them to work to Xerox them, and still have them. Actually, I found them in a scrapbook not too long ago, and legally they don't hold up very well.
A couple misspellings, some contradictions.
Yeah.
What did your parents teach you about work ethic?
Oh God, my father sacrificed so much for our family. His dream, I mean, he was in high school, he was a really top performing athlete, and he really wanted to go that direction, but he had a really severe injury when he was a senior in high school and almost died. He actually had a blood clot, a blood clot in his brain, and he got very close to death, and that kind of derailed his plans. It meant he was thinking about going into the Air Force. He wanted to be a pilot, and once that happened, that he wasn't going to get accepted to the Air Force anymore, and so his whole career trajectory and path kind of got derailed. And he, as many, I think, men of that generation did, said, well, I'm going into business. That's just what you did. Even though that wasn't his passion at all, but that's just sort of what you did. So he has always been he's always been insistent on us, me and my siblings, following our dreams, and doing what, sacrificing for us so that we could. And, to this day, he's just, both my parents are incredibly supportive, and have always been incredibly supportive. There was no, when I declared or said that this is what I wanted to do, there was never any pushback. There was never any, are you sure you don't want to consider something else? And so they've always been wonderfully supportive. And to this day, they love my mother and I grew up doing shows together. So, it's her fault, really.
You can blame it on her.
We, oh my gosh, we took a ballet class together, our tap class together at one point. We were in these summer productions together. We did those together. So, we bonded over the arts, and it's been and my siblings love it as well. My brother, my brother, who is is a quintessential straight male, knows more Sondheim lyrics maybe than even I do. It's a bonding thing for us as well. So no, my family is incredibly supportive.
I love that. I love that. Do you have any mentors, or have you had any particular mentors with any standout pieces of advice?
Um, well, Keith Prentice, who was the gentleman who started this theater in Ohio, that was absolutely a mentor to me as a child. I guess saw something in me that he maybe recognized in himself. Um, and I remember when he cast me when I was a child as the boy in what's I think his name is Louis in The King and I.
Mm.
And he didn't realize, I think, until neither of us realized until one of the first days of rehearsal that my voice was changing. And I remember coming to rehearsal and like one of the first rehearsals and trying to sing the song, and there was just no possible way it was going to happen. And he had to pull me aside and essentially fire me from the production.
Mm.
But he wrote, and I was obviously devastated. It was heartbreaking. But he wrote me this incredibly sweet letter as a child, essentially laying out how challenging this business can be at times. But I think he said something, surrounding yourself with great people that will support you, and essentially saying that he was one of those people and would be there to support me, and there would be other things to come. And I was just very touched by it. And that was, I don't even know, maybe 12 years old at that point in time. But no, I've been very fortunate to have guideposts along the way with many different individuals that have helped shape my career and shape who I am. And no one particular piece of advice that has stuck out, but just just those people you meet in your life that show up all of a sudden and shift trajectory or shift ways of thinking. And I've been fortunate to have a handful of those individuals in my life along the way that have just that I still love to be with or create with, or I've been very lucky.
Is there a particular project that has taught you the most about yourself, or a significant amount?
Well, so I guess it was about 7 years ago now. I was hired as the artistic director at the Cape Playhouse in Cape Cod. And that was a tremendous undertaking. The theater, when I was hired there, was in a bad way. And I up until that point, I had experience directing. I had experienced. I'd worked at Cirque, and I had experienced leadership in many different ways. But that undertaking was probably the most challenging endeavor in the arts that I've ever had, on many different levels. And I think I learned more about myself and the art form and the industry through that experience than anything else. I would say that when I started there, the theater was near bankruptcy, and had many years of sort of hemorrhaging patrons, and the community felt alienated. But it was the theater that was beloved by so many people, both in the community and artistically. I mean, from the theater community at large. And I learned through that process of rebuilding that organization to trust my instincts. And I think that's what really in the end made the most difference. trusting my gut, trusting my instincts. I mean, I was relatively young. I mean, it's all relative, but when I got that job, I felt like I had to, because of my age, I had to, sort of prove myself, and consistently trusting my instincts was, I think, what got me through, and helped stabilize the theater. Trusting my instincts as far as, gosh, how do I want to say this? I mean, it kind of connects back to the mentoring question of I had been surrounded by so many wonderful people over the course of my career, and that was one of the things that I forget who it was who said to me, just trust your heart, trust your soul. And so I really learned to do that through that job. And it's not easy. Oh my gosh, it is not easy to always do that. At least for me, it's not. And so trusting my instincts is where I am today.
It's funny you bring that up, because what comes to mind is wrong is wrong, even if everyone's doing it. Right is right, even if no one's doing it. And
Yes.
That's a real character moment for oneself to, identify that and hold true to it, even if everything around you seems to be going in a different direction.
Yep. It's similar with, like, as a director, I love the right note given at the wrong time is still a wrong note.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much psychology at play, and navigating those situations is key.
It is. It's funny you say instincts, because that's one of my questions for you. How have you gotten better at listening to yourself and trusting your instincts? How has that gotten better?
I mean, I guess learning from not doing it, like,
Sure.
how many times have I gone back and said, Mike, I wish I would have just listened to myself. I wish I would have just trusted my gut, or,
Sure.
It's so easy at times to go with the group consensus, or to go with what you think you should do, or what is the popular decision, or, it's, I don't want to get too much down, like, the rabbit hole of like the nonprofit makeup of having a board of directors, and but it's when you have the American model of the most traditional model of nonprofit theater is this executive director, artistic director model, that report to a board of directors, and
Yes.
the board of directors is inevitably made up of individuals who, for the most part, generally don't have a lot of experience in the arts or theater, and they tend to be more business focused or finance, and so I and this was mostly through the Cape, had to learn to that sometimes in those positions, as the artistic leader of an organization, you are the sole person in that room who has the background in the arts or in theater. And it's a unique position, because you step into any other boardroom in the country, or, and a lot of the people in the room share the same kind of background. They share the same kind of history. And in these circumstances, you may be the sole voice who has a unique perspective, or and sometimes that can be challenging to support, or not support, to defend. I'm a firm believer in the business model of when you are trying to strengthen an institution, a theater, that you have, I'll use the Cape as an experience. When I came in, they were in a very, very bad way financially. And the instinct from the board was to cut. Let's reduce expenses, let's reduce seasons. And it took a little bit of convincing, but I had to say, look, you guys, we are not going to attract patrons by cutting and doing, 2-person shows, or We have to do the exact opposite. We have to expand. We have to invest in our product. We have to choose programming that is exciting, and oftentimes that means it involves taking a big risk, and financially and otherwise, and inevitably that's paid off for me. Investing in the product at the Cape, expanding the season, expanding the production sizes, was a tremendous success there. And sometimes to a board of directors who has a finance background or a different kind of background for us, that's terrifying for them. Yeah. They think, it's just a different perhaps way of thinking than business practice, I should say.
Yeah. Well, yes, because that's the reason you're brought in, right? To have the creative background, and then you have to justify it financially, which can be very, very difficult to say. It is fiscally responsible to spend more money when something's not working previously. I'm curious, with that in mind and that communication aspect, how have you gotten better at negotiating and just communicating?
Oh gosh, I think you mean negotiating as far as with the board type, yeah. Well, it's a fine line of sticking with your instincts, being assertive, but Elia Kazan has this wonderful quote about the psychology of directing, and that his approach to directing, he had so much psychology that was at play when as a director, that he's always navigating the room, taking the temperature of the actors, the creatives, and I have that same approach with working with a board or working with the company, with staff, that you have to be able to evaluate the temperature, if you will.
Yes.
And instill in your team or in your board or your whomever it is, a sense of investment, of empowerment in the product that you're creating, right? So once people, I found, feel excited about what's happening or invested in what's happening, that the trust level tends to bond, that it increases. And once that happens, it's much easier to get things done. It's much easier to progress. And so maintaining relationships or developing relationships with individuals on the board or individuals or actors or whomever it is, whatever the dynamic that I'm working in, is really key. I tend to feel, I try to be intuitive, if that makes sense, of reading people's energies and trying to have one-on-one conversations or connections with individuals based on those dynamics. That sounds a little ethereal, but it's connecting with each person that I can individually, and instilling, I guess this is what it comes down to, is instilling a certain level of trust with those people, as best you can, and then building on those relationships.
You've been listening to Entertainment X, the podcast. You can follow Entertainment X on Instagram at _EntertainmentX_. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join Clay next week for another curiosity conversation on Entertainment X. Thank you for listening.